So was life a little bit bewildering for you as a little girl?
At the very beginning, of course, I never went back to the flat in Kirby. My mum went home. My grandmother, Edie, came over the next day in a taxi to sort of settle me in. And mum went home. She went to work, of course, at her day job. I think she was still at Pure Chemicals then. I can't remember what. Yeah, no, I think she was. She was either that or the Concrete Utilities Company or Rio Tinto Zinc. She worked at all of them. She went back and handed her 2-week notice in at work, which she went on and finished. Went back to the flat and packed everything up. And I think my cousin Peter drove over in his van with Ange. And that I literally, the night we went to Rembrandt for dinner, I never went home again to the little flat in Kirby on the trading estate. And so I was still too young to go to school because I was only 4 and this is November. So I was going to start right after the Christmas holidays. And so we went to the local Heswall County Primary, the Puddydale, they used to call it. And, mum and dad had a meeting with the headmaster and said, well, how are we going to handle it? So he said, oh, don't worry, it'll be perfectly normal. Everyone will treat her just like a normal child. So Mr. Kitching, his name was, in his wisdom, the day before I started in the school assembly, pulled all the kids in and said, now, there's a very special child coming to this school. And her brother's very famous, but you're to leave her alone. You're not to bully her. You're not to make a fuss of her. And then gave him a list of what not to do. You're not to steal her lunch. You're not to pee in her wellies. You're not to whip the name tags out of her coat. You're not to cut bits of her hair off. So what do you think they did?
All of that.
All of the above, on and on and on. Yeah, my second day in school, I went to put my wellies on to go home, and they were already wet inside. Some little boy whose sister was a fan of the Rolling Stones decided to have a wee in my wellies.
No.
Nice.
Oh, and you probably lost things like books.
Yeah.
And
my uniform with the name, hats, coats.
Oh.
Yeah. My little brown Mac went missing about once a month. Yeah, because it had a name tag in it. A lunchbox, the green Tupperware lunchbox with the name and felt pen on the top. Yeah, all of that.
And you obviously gained an awful lot of good friends.
Oh, very quickly. Yes. I was 5, or going to be 5. And all of a sudden I had these 10 and 11-year-old birthday party invitations, lots of them. Then I moved from the Puddydale. They opened a brand new school right at the bottom of our road, Gayton County Primary. So I moved there. And by that time, sort of the kids in Heswall, which is still a relatively small town, village, they got used to the fact that, we all existed and we were those folks on the Beatle watch. And so Gayton County Primary wasn't that bad. Plus, by then I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, and I could stand up for myself a bit more. And then I went to West Kirby Grammar School, and there's always a bit of a flurry and a fuss when you first go somewhere. But Julian Lennon was actually going to Caldy boys' school. I was West Kirby County Grammar for girls, and he went to Caldy for boys, which is only about 3 or 4 miles apart, I think. And so Julian, of course, took the brunt of the local heat. The heat had worn off me somewhat by then. But, it teaches you, it's a good lesson. It teaches you at the very beginning to sort the wheat from the chaff and know who your mates are and who's got your back and who just wants to come to the Christmas party.
That was an early lesson to learn.
It was, and it was a pretty valuable one, I have to say. Still holds me in good stead 50 odd years later.
You mentioned about the postman calling twice a day with thousands and thousands of letters. What were the fans sending them? Were they sending gifts and long letters, and were they asking for personal items in return?
All of the above. I mean, some of them were just, the envelopes were what used to amaze us. Some of them would come all the way from Japan and just be addressed to Beatlepole, England. And it would find our house. And then you'd open it and the letter would be beautifully handwritten in kanji, in Japanese, and none of us could read it. So I have no idea what half of them were asking. Romanian, Pakistani, I mean, you name it, we got letters in it, Yeah. I must say, out of our primary school, I had the best stamp collection of any kid on the block. It was great. Yeah, the American fans were actually the ones that were a bit more what I would call marketing savvy. They would, there was one girl who, she would repeatedly send different flavors of chewing gum, cinnamon or juicy fruit or double mint or whatever. And she'd say, would Paul unwrap the wrappers? Because when I braid them together, you send them, he chews the chewing gum. makes a big gumball, you send it back to me and send me the wrappers, and I'll braid them together, and it will be 6'2.5", which is exactly how tall Paul is. I was like, okay, get some mental health counseling. Sorry, but yeah, you've got a bit of an issue. And then they would send pillowcases. Would Paul sleep on this and send it back? Don't wash it. You know, things like that.
Did you and your mother actually send items back?
Oh God, yeah. We used to answer every letter that we could, and those that we didn't know what to do with, Auntie Frida Kelly would deal with. And yeah, we would send. It's actually George Harrison's mum, Louise Harrison, started it. So she used to go to Paddy's Market in Liverpool and buy, you know, huge amounts of shirt buttons or old seconds of towels or sheets or whatever. And she and Harry would sometimes come over and visit my dad. Harry liked to watch the horse racing with Jim. And we'd sit around with pinking shears and cut these sheets and towels up and send them out in little 2-inch squares and saying, oh, you know, this was, we were going to throw this out, but this is a towel from our house. And then she got wise. Louise knew somebody who worked at Atlantic Telegraph and Telephone, which later became AT&T. And she used to get her hands on these very thin telephone wires that looked like guitar and bass strings. And we'd sit around with pliers and cut them up into 3-inch bits and say, oh, you know, Paul was tuning his bass this morning and this fell off here, but this one broke, here's a bit of string. And so we tried to send them some, even if it was fake, we tried to send them some memento, you know.
Priceless. And somebody somewhere will still have this.
Oh, I'm sure it's probably for sale on eBay for 40,000 quid.
So living at home, life was quite normal for you to have John, George or Ringo call in?
John more than any of them. George and Ringo, of course, would, if they'd come to Liverpool, if they had the time, they would generally spend it with their parents. The most times we would see John and Ringo was when we'd go down to visit Paul in London in St. John's Wood, and there'd be, you know, a Sunday lunch or a birthday or something, you know, a reason to get together at Ringo's house or what have you. But John, of course, when he started to make some money, he and Cynthia